Welcome back to the ClinicMind podcast, where we explore how healthcare organizations can operate smarter, grow sustainably, and take better care of the people who deliver care every day. I am Dr. Edisa Shirley, and I work closely with clinical leaders and executive teams at ClinicMind to optimize operations, staffing models, and overall team performance. At ClinicMind, our mission is simple but powerful. One platform, one growth engine. Truly believe that when systems are connected and operations are aligned, practices don't just run better, people thrive. And today, we're diving into one of the most urgent and costly challenges in behavioral health, which is clinical turnover. We talk a lot about burnout in healthcare, but what often gets missed is why burnout happens. More often than not, it's not the work itself, it's the operational gaps around the work, broken workflows, staffing mismatches, scheduling chaos, and systems that create friction instead of support. So to unpack all of this, I am joined by my dear friend, Tracy Glynn, who brings deep experience in healthcare leadership and workforce strategy. Tracy has spent years working with clinical teams and operational leaders, helping organizations rethink how they staff, support, and retain the clinicians. And she has a very real firsthand understanding of what happens when the people inside them. So Tracy, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you and have you join this conversation.
Thanks, Edisa. I'm so excited to be here. I love talking about this stuff and I'm excited to dive in with you.
Awesome. So Tracy, let's start at the top. When clinicians leave, leadership often attributes it to things like workload, compensation, or that's just the market right now. I'm sure you've heard that.
Yep.
But in your experience, what are the real reasons clinicians decide to walk?
Well, you said something in your intro that was really insightful. Clinicians don't leave jobs, they leave friction. So when they don't feel supported, when they feel managed when they truly don't feel like they can make an impact, things aren't clear, they're not predictable, they don't know what to expect either with their compensation or their scheduling, and there's just not that alignment between leadership and the clinical staff. I think that's a big reason people are leaving. We're seeing more and more people today who are less focused on job titles and to a certain extent compensation. I mean, let's be real, you have to be competitive with your compensation and be within the market range. However, I think as important as that are people's ability to feel effective in their jobs and feel like they're contributing to the organization. So when those things are out of alignment is when we see people start to disengage and consider other opportunities.
Yeah. And then also in behavioral health, there's like two things that I can highlight that are really unique. One, when providers leave, they take their caseloads, which is very unique for this specialty. And second part is, and I think you already kind of mentioned that no one goes into this field to become rich. Yes, we want to be compensated well, 100%, but we went into this profession to help people, to make a difference. Making the choices where to work is probably going to be closely aligned to that. What do you think?
100%. Absolutely. People want to know, how are they going to collaborate with their peers? A big thing is understanding their schedule and how that schedule is going to get filled up and what does that look like for them? How involved do they need to be in scheduling or marketing? And all of those things really need to be very transparent and easy for them to understand so they have that comfort level that they are going to be effective in treating their patients.
Yeah. And one thing I often hear is that turnover doesn't just affect the person leaving, it creates a ripple effect. So from your perspective, how does clinician turnover impact patient care? I think you already touched on team morale already, but then also just the financial health of the overall practice.
You mentioned it, the clinicians take patients with them. But I think even beyond that, A big thing that we're talking about now is executive drain. So when you're losing clinicians, that's stealing bandwidth from your leaders because they're spending time not only communicating the scope of the position and communicating that to internal stakeholders, participating in interviews, figuring out coverage plans. There's delayed growth, right? Because if you're having turnover and open positions, you're in no position to kind of have these growth initiatives that help the business grow. So there's just a lot of implications, and the turnover never affects your average players. What happens is your very best players are the ones who get burnt out because they're the ones that step up. Then that starts to quietly build resentment after a certain amount of time. They become disengaged. Now they're no longer your best players, or worse, they start considering a move. So there's just a wide like you said, ripple effect when you have that turnover.
Yeah, I think that is such an important point. Like, turnover isn't just an HR problem. It's really a strategic risk if you think about it. When clinicians are constantly cycling in and out, practices lose the continuity of care because now the patients are, even into other specialties, if a patient is coming in and seeing a different provider every time, there's some trust that is getting broken there.
100%.
So even if we take this out of behavioral health and take it to the chiropractic care. So let's say, patient comes in, there's one chiropractor, and then they come in, there's a different one. There's a bit of lack of trust there. And then, as you mentioned, teams are stretched thin. So the people that choose to stay, now they have to pick up the load that is left. And leaders end up stuck in really this hiring loop. And, instead of building stability, they're constantly hiring, training, onboarding, credentialing.
Right.
Which is a huge investment, right?
Yeah. And onboarding, you talk about onboarding, I mean, that cost, if you lose a clinician within the first year, you're never recovering that onboarding cost. So, and that doesn't show up on your P&L statement, right? But there is a cost to onboarding clinicians. And if they're leaving within a year, then you never recover that.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's zoom now into the operations. In your work, what are some of the most overlooked operational contributors to clinician dissatisfaction and burnout?
I think there's a couple things that I'm seeing right now. Just the misalignment with scope of work and understanding, and different leaders and clinicians having different ideas about what the position and responsibilities entail. So I think during the recruitment and candidate onboarding experience, even prior to interviewing candidates, the team needs to get really clear on what is that scope, and then be able to very clearly communicate that to their candidates to make sure everybody's aligned, because that misalignment, that causes a lot of friction, spoken and unspoken. So that's a big piece. Wasted time. People want the technology. They just don't want it to be rolled at them. They want to be a part of it. And they need to see and be communicated with about how it's going to save them time. Because ultimately, if it's saving them time, they're able to do their job and do what they love, which is seeing patients, fill their schedules up, be more productive, hopefully earn a little bit more money, and everything flows more smoothly. I think technology is great. People really want it. I've seen people leave their positions because they don't feel the practice is incorporating enough technology, and they're afraid of becoming stale or not having skills that are keeping up with the market. But it has to be done in a thoughtful way that involves the team and really helps them understand where this is going to benefit them and help them more effective in their practice.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We often hear, even on our side, about inefficient workflows and tech overload. Like Excel, as I say to my teams, if we're not solving a problem, then what's the point, right?
Right.
That's how everybody should approach any kind of innovation, any kind of technology, automation, anything that they are incorporating in their practice. If it's not solving a problem and aligning with their workflows, what's the point? Now you're typically causing more issues for that practice and additional burdens now that they have to deal with.
Right.
I've seen many situations where leadership believes staffing is fine on paper, but frontline clinicians are completely overwhelmed. What signals should leaders be watching for that indicate operational strain before it turns into attrition?
A big one is when your best performers who've maybe been involved in mentoring and leading informally, even if they don't hold that leadership title, if you start to see them disengaging, seeing fewer patients, and just kind of not contributing to conversations as much, that's a key indicator that somebody's kind of silently getting frustrated and doesn't see the use in saying what they want to say.
Don't they call that a silent quitting? Isn't there a term?
Quiet quitting.
Quiet
yeah.
quitting.
Yeah.
Yes, quiet quitting. Yeah. I'm like, I know there's a term for that. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So there's just like that disconnect between leadership and then frontline. We see that all the time. I'm sure you do.
Yeah. It's almost like an apathy, like, I'm not going to have any impact on this, so I'm just going to kind of go along to get along sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think most leaders want to support their teams,
right?
But without visibility into workload, capacity, friction points, it's almost impossible to intervene early.
Right.
Okay, Tracy, so let's talk solutions. So when you think about streamlined staffing model in behavioral health, what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, things have changed a lot, right? So I don't think anymore we can look at one clinician equals one workload. It's more of a system based. And like you said, you need to be thoughtful about the tech. There's certainly a risk of tech overload and implementing tech that maybe solves a problem, but maybe not a problem we have. Somebody has that problem, but it's not a problem a particular practice has. So being very intentional and seeking input from your staff on whether the tech you're considering is going to solve those problems. And now I think with staffing being more of a system versus a one clinician, one workload, I think smart leaders are looking at, is there a problem here that tech could help fix before we add more clinical staff? And maybe we need to add more clinical staff, but can we somehow support the team we have before we take that step of adding somebody else to the team?
Yeah. And how can automation and, if they can, analytics support smarter staffing decision? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, what I think is the KPIs are important. And I think, this is something early in my career that I know I didn't pay enough attention to, but we always look at time to fill. That's the big KPI for when we're going through the hiring process. But I really think you need to dive deeper into that to make sure that your candidate experience is reflecting, because there's a statistic I read recently that you can predict turnover within 90 days of an employee's start date. So that whole candidate experience, as soon as they come on board, is part of the employee experience, right? Time to fill is very important, but equally important, I think, is to track some additional measures that really give insight into how you're creating that candidate and therefore employee experience. So things like not only time to fill, but time to hire. How long is it taking between the time somebody applies and the time they're coming on? What's the hiring manager response time? Can that be tightened up? Do you have a very clear process? Some of it is more qualitative too, like, are we aligned? Did we have to change the scope? Do we have to change the job description? What's our acceptance rate? Are we getting people to the final stages and then they're not accepting the offer? Because these are all analytics. And yes, I'm talking about the recruiting process, but as we discussed, that becomes the candidate/employee experience and affects how long they're going to stay and how they feel about joining the company right out of the gate.
Yeah, there's so many flags, red and green, before the employee even starts, we sometimes just ignore. And because we are trying so hard to hit that KPI, right? Time to fill, right? Like it's more focused on let's fill this role versus let's fill this role with the right candidate. So one thing here that we focus here at ClinicMind is aligning staffing with real demand and not really just assumptions, which means dynamic scheduling, role-based workflows, real-time visibility into caseload balance and utilization. So when staffing decisions are driven by data that dashboards can provide and paired with tools that reduce that friction, clinicians get support, instead of that pressure. But then from a leadership perspective, it provides a visibility into how many people you actually need. Like if you're thinking about waiting lists, how do you decide when to hire another clinician? Are you hiring a clinician when you need them tomorrow? Because we know that's too late, right? So now you're just scrambling to fill that role. Or do you have a good visibility into your systems, into productivity, so you can make those educated decisions before you have a need? And I'm sure you probably know better than I do. How long does it take for a clinician, like when you do a first interview to the moment when they can start? How long is that process?
Well, that's going to depend a lot on the practice and whether they have expedited credentialing, who are their payers, all of that plays into it. But generally speaking, you're probably looking at a minimum of 60 days.
And that's kind of going to my point. A lot of leaders, since they don't have a visibility to their, let's say even waiting lists, right? So let's say you're not replacing a clinician, you're just adding more clinicians. You need to understand your practice work, like flow, patient flow, to know, okay, in 60 days, I will need a clinician, right? So that is really where decisions need to like start happening, where you're like, okay, so I will interview, hire, onboard, credential, and they will be ready to see patients 2 to 3 months from now. And that's a prep that it takes a while. Right?
And then it takes a minute to find that person, right? So you've got to build in another minimum of 4 to 8 weeks to find the right person before you're even to the point where you can get them credentialed and on board.
Absolutely. And I know that is something that your organization helps with. And I know that's something you have helped with, like even for me in the past, in some of the previous organizations, but because that's just another thing for leaders to do. It's not, I wouldn't say it was difficult to like find someone, but when you add that to with everything else that leaders, business owners, a lot of times clinicians as well, they're doing everything at once. I'm sure you see a psychiatrist that is a practice owner, leader, clinical leader, same thing
100%.
So now you add another task. Hey, go find a clinician when, I mean, it's hard to find time, and someone like you can definitely like step in and just take that load off of them. Operations and culture are deeply connected. From your perspective, what role does leadership communication play in clinician retention?
I think it's probably one of the biggest contributors to clinician retention is, communication at every level. These are highly educated workforce. They want to know, they want to feel involved. They don't want to be managed at. So I think that communication with leadership is crucial on a daily basis, that everything's very transparent and clear. Of course, there are certain things about the practice that can't always be communicated immediately, but I think the day-to-day operations has to be very transparent about expectations. They need to be seeking that input, even if it doesn't align somehow. If leadership's vision doesn't align with the clinician vision, that's a conversation that needs to be had. It can't just be, this is how we're doing things. That's a surefire way to lose the buy-in and engagement of your staff.
That makes sense. And if you look ahead, what trends do you see reshaping how behavioral health organizations think about staffing and retention?
Yeah, I think, again, there's a big trend toward clinicians wanting to know more about their day-to-day. I think that organizations need to be very clear before they start considering whether it's replacing or bringing on new clinicians about the scope of the role. Make sure everybody within the organization is aligned on that so they know what the right candidate looks like, what skills or training or education do they possess. And then, just really being able to foster that communication, have good smart tech in place that helps the clinicians be more effective in their role, and just feel supported both from a technology side, an ongoing professional development side, and communication within the organization.
Do you see AI playing any role in how we staff? Have you thought about that? I know AI is impacting
everything.
Yeah. How do you think AI will impact, improve or not staffing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different angles we can look at that, right? From helping us create effective job descriptions, even creating recruitment plans, helping with some of the metrics you were mentioning earlier, where it's like, okay, this is, what we're dealing with now. How soon do we need to hire somebody? So I think it can be really effective in a lot of aspects of the staffing and just knowing where the needs are and using it as a kind of a strategic partner to kind of help you determine what those need and timeframes are.
Yeah. I mean, we really don't know, right? But it's always interesting to hear how different specialties are approaching the AI. And I think there's so many people that are just trying to stay completely away from it. And then there's the ones that are overusing it. Should AI be doing your work? Should AI be doing, writing the descriptions?
Right.
There's so much.
Yeah. I mean, we can spot that a mile away, right? Everybody's getting pretty good at seeing okay, you wrote this in AI. So, and the paradox is that we're all told we got to start using AI, but then everybody's like, I can tell you used AI to do that. So it's, you want to strike that balance. But there are smart ways to use it that I think could be strategic without having it be your ghostwriter. I think that's probably the worst way to use AI, unless you're, polishing your own thoughts or something like that. But I think that can be dangerous and make you less authentic and just not connect with whomever, whether it's your staff or leaders or potential clients. But there are ways to kind of utilize AI, help with transcribing. There's a lot of great tools out there for interviewing to actually really be able to transcribe the interview, and so that you can focus on the conversation. Because how many times when you're in an interview, you're writing down, and then you're not really listening to what the person is saying next because you're still writing down their comments from the last question. So I find that some of those AI note takers can be really effective in the interview process. So then you can go back and really kind of dissect the interview and reevaluate, what did they say about this, and with their permission always, of course. But there are ways to use it, I think, that are really effective and can help streamline that process.
That's a really good point. And I didn't really think about it, when you're interviewing candidates, how often we're just typing, taking notes. If you're interviewing for a role, it's very common to have 3, 4, 5, 8 interviews.
Right.
Think back,
please don't have 8 interviews.
With different candidates, if somebody's interviewing for it, then you're like, oh, well, who said that? So,
right, exactly. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Thank you, Tracy. So, okay, if there's one mindset shift leaders can make today to improve retention, what would be that one recommendation?
Continuing to look at leadership as a partnership with your staff versus an oversight of your staff. How can you support your team? How can you partner with them to make them more effective in their roles and make them feel supported? And I think that goes a long way to helping you not have to be the highest compensation. Let's be honest, if you're the highest compensation today, that's great. Somebody's going to come along. If that's all you got going, somebody's going to come along and outpay you next month. So you've got to be thinking about these day-to-day operations that really are going to keep people engaged and excited to be part of the organization and feel like they're making an impact.
And on that note,
ClinicMind, your all-in partner for practice success.